This is Ad Bits with Alex Grossman. Today, I'm joined by Pat Cahill. Pat has spent nearly 25 years in production, and I mean proper production from the ground up. He started as a runner in Hamburg, worked his way through agency production at some serious shops, Adam and EveDDB, Havas London, and then made a move that not many people have made cleanly into the in-house and holding company world. He ran production for BMW and MINI across EMEA at Media.Monks. And most recently, he was brought into Publicis Production as their global production architect on Mars Pet Nutrition, their biggest new business win of 2025. He's just come off that and is taking a breather, which means we can get him at exactly the right moment. Pat, welcome. Really glad you're here, and let's go. So, the career I've got here, Hamburg runner, not London, not the obvious move. Most people started in the UK. Why Hamburg, and what did starting somewhere else actually do for you?
Yeah, first of all, hi. Thanks for inviting me along. That's it's really kind of you, really nice. And I'm looking forward to our chat. And so yeah, Hamburg is my original home, I guess. So my dad's English, my mum's German, and my dad moved to Hamburg in the 70s, just before I was born. He's a musician. Things went wrong, like his career took a turn for the worse, and my mum said, "Look, we're moving to Hamburg, where I'm from, and you're going to stop this music, and you're going to stop hanging out with the wrong people, and we're just going to rebuild our life." So that's where I was, and I was kind of always kind of this English heart, German brain, mum an accountant, dad a musician. So there was a symbiosis bubbling, and I was very keen to break into the creative industry. And then an opportunity presented itself to do an apprenticeship at a production company in Hamburg, and they mainly specialized in animation and music videos. And music videos were what got me into where I am now originally, like in MTV age, basically. MTV was where I wanted to work. MTV was kind of my brand, and I loved that kind of the lifestyle and the music and the perfect marriage of imagery and music, which kind of probably like the two worlds colliding, the two kind of drivers of my kind of the tapestry of my youth, adolescence, and then adulthood. Watching films and listening to music is it's still very much top of my list in terms of pastime, alongside football and being a girl dad. So there was, I had that end goal to move to London and be in the industry on this side of the Ärmelkanal, or the channel, and that was the beginning was in Hamburg, just like it was for the Beatles.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you just said it makes total sense what you've done, really, or where you've ended up, because the creative and the accountant. I mean, not that production, but there's an element definitely in producing of that, pulling the creative and keeping it all together.
Yeah.
So you came out of music, A&R, artist management. I always think people who came through music have a different relationship with talent and directors. Did that shape how you work with creative people?
I think so. Yeah. So it's funny, even agency side, I've always been drawn more into, had more and still have more friends on the production side and more friends who are directors than account directors. So I've always kind of had that natural tendency to gravitate towards the creative minds, also growing up in a musical household. So yes, I've always kind of been revered the work of a director and any kind of film talent, probably more than maybe others would, or seen more of the worth and the value. And I've never kind of I've always been respectful of the boundaries between I'm agency, this is production company, this is the director. It's their thing now. We've given them the work, we've given them what we've made, and it's now for them to build, to fill this house with furniture and decorate it for us. And at that point, you give the ownership to someone else, which is I think, which a lot of creatives find difficult, which a lot of clients find difficult, and producers alike. But I often find myself in that situation where someone says we don't like what the director has done with it, but it's like, but that's why you hired them, right? You wanted them to flip it, to change it up, to elevate it, to take it to the next level. So I've always been very respectful, as long as they are respectful of their input, and ultimately bringing it to life, bringing the idea to life. So yes, I think it's shaped, without me having properly thought about that, it's probably shaped my relationship and my ways of working in that sense.
Interesting. It's a really interesting thing at the moment. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that delineation that we used to have, that used to be so sort of sacrosanct in a way, where as you said, you hire a director, you just let them get on with it. I mean, obviously there's a team, you're working with the agency and the creatives. That line seems to be getting less and less now. It's quite interesting as people are. I was quite surprised at some of the comments I've been hearing recently about that. Anyway, not to go too much into it, but anyway, moving on. Agency production at adam&eveDDB and Havas, working with Jonas Åkerlund and Sam Pilling. How do you say his name? Is it Pilling or Piling?
Pilling.
Pilling, I thought so, yeah, just to double check. I don't want to ruin that. At what point did you stop thinking about production as getting the job made and start thinking about it as something bigger?
Probably during my time at Havas, where I was head of production and working closely, more closely with finance, with the CFO, and with the chief operating officer, who is a fantastic human being, and was probably my the biggest influence on the latter stages of my career. Where all of a sudden I had to think about revenue, or I was forced to think about utilization and how much of producers' hours are covered by retainers of project fees. And I'd previously kind of lived in a sense of oblivion of that, where it was purely about the making and the creative product. And it's hard to straddle that kind of balance between effectiveness and creative excellence, and then internally, obviously, having to think about how you pay your producers. Like, where does the money come in? Does it come in from a client, or do the creatives, do the producers sit on a retainer, or do you have to bring in the project? And what happens if you lose a client, or if you win a pitch? And so that kind of awakened my commercial spirit in that sense. Or I was forced to, as you initially also said, like evolution happens when we're forced to evolve, and I think that happened in that sense. But then truly discovering that kind of entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial sense and talent that happened at Monks, where I was given the opportunity to manage the P&L of the production hub on BMW MINI, and I was really, I got really geeky.
Hold off on that, because we're going to come into. I've got a whole thing on that in a bit.
Okay, cool.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Please keep going.
So yeah, that was during the Havas days, where I so coming back to Havas briefly. I mean, you're going to edit that at that point, I guess. So that's where I guess the commercial aspect, in a more overarching sense, became a lot more prominent in my thinking and my ways of working. And I found it quite hard, coming from a creative producer background, or someone who lived and breathed and died for that creative idea and the perfect execution, and ultimately the reaping of the rewards in terms of either internal accolades or peer-centric accolades, or ultimately awards. So for me, it was quite hard to detach myself from that. So that was a proper journey, going from EP to head of production and trying to manage the different expectations. Because if you're the head of production in an agency business, you will have 4 or 5 different stakeholders you're dealing with, and their KPIs will be sometimes diametrically opposed, and therefore their expectations they have of you can be quite conflicting, and will make you sometimes tie yourself in knots, and it's hard to know whose mast to nail your colors to, and you end up kind of doing maybe a halfway house, or doing something that doesn't do yourself justice, or your vision, or your ideology, nor does it then necessarily fulfill the needs of the business. And then if you kind of pick the creative route, then from an operative sense, or from a commercial sense, or from an account management sense, that might not necessarily be what their expectations are. So I found it really, really tricky to find that balance, and I think a lot of my peers would agree. And then it's so people centric, and management changes, and you're reporting to different people, and you're constantly having to kind of change your hymn sheet up a little bit. It's like when you're a professional football player, right? And your manager changes, all of a sudden you have to play in a different system that doesn't necessarily suit you, and you find yourself on the bench, or moving on to another club. So that I found that was the first time I properly realized the volatility of how people changing at the top affect the middle management. And yeah, that was the first time that I really thought, okay, cool, I'll have to also make myself billable, because the role of head of production in an agency is highly volatile and highly delicate and fragile in a sense, because it's hard to, at that level, bill staff to the client on a retained basis, or on a project basis, really. So you get forced into, or you force yourself into going back into producing, which is native as well, and you kind of want to do that, but at the same time then you kind of have to make a decision of whether you want to manage people, whether you manage down, or whether you want to manage up, and I think that's a difficulty that I think the higher you rise in life and at work, is always going to be that that kind of fault line that you're standing on. You know, looking after your team, which was always kind of the most important part to me, or looking out for yourself and doing right by your line manager. So yeah.
That's very interesting. And there's a word, empathy, that keeps getting knocked around with all the various discussions at various levels. I keep speaking to people about whether it's the production company who receives a script and is very upset about how rubbish it is, the lack of thinking about. I remember myself specifically when I used to work at a place like Rowe being, just insulted almost, the feeling of like, this is terrible. And obviously it's come to us into order to us to, as you used words before we was talking, which was flipping it. That's why it's come that way. But that entire process of how it goes, and all the thing that, all the machinations turning behind to get us there, people don't really appreciate. And there's a distinct lack of empathy across the board. So I can imagine it's everywhere. Just quickly, because we've got so much more to go through. So just a quick break, because I want to talk about AdBits. This is and who it's supported by. So it's supported by Green Desert, which is my company, which represents trusted service production partners across Europe. I work with 2.0 Film across Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Italy, and Austria. Grandma across Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Tickle Film in Spain, and Sparrow Films in Prague. 10 territories, 1 conversation. If you've got a bid coming up anywhere across Europe, give me a call. Anyway, and now we go back into it. I'm trying out a new way of doing it to sound less. But it's always a challenge.
No, I like
again,
it.
We need a bit of empathy there on how these things roll, how you manage to incorporate these things into our content.
Yeah, like stakeholder management is so important, and it's nothing that you're taught. when you grow up and move through the ranks, you learn the hard way, right? By finding out how to best not do it. And it's the same at a production company when you're working with directors, right? It's also different characters, and you figure out how to work with each other by doing just that, and jumping into a first job together. So that's why I always say it's so important to get a director, to book a director via the production company that's their home, rather than loaning them out, which can work. But ultimately, it's about those kind of relationships and tried and trusted partnerships, right? But yeah,
interesting point. There's a lot of discussion. It's a very interesting point about loan out and getting a director and where they're at. But just going back a second, because I kind of want to go off on a tangent on that one, but I kind of want to get through. There's a lot of stuff to get through as well. So going back to the move at Media.Monks, which was a big one.
Yeah.
And you've kind of touched on this, but just in case there was anything else you wanted to add, you went from agency into running an in-house production hub for BMW across EMEA, teams in 6 countries, serious revenue, the whole thing. What did that change about how you see production? And is that something you've already answered?
No, it's an evolution of that. It's a build on that, because if I just briefly revisit kind of my 2 previous stops in an in-house capability sense or interplay, where both at Adam and Eve with Cain and Abel, and at Havas with as they were called then, HKXP, I think, and now obviously Pros on Pixels. Rolls off the tongue. There was always kind of not a push, but there was an encouragement, an enticement from the business side of things, or kind of a pointing out, you could also do this in-house. Go through that door over there. Why didn't you explore this? And there was kind of an innate reticence on my part, where I think it's human nature as well, where you kind of go like, if someone tells me to do something, I'm not going to do it. And ultimately, you have to be convinced by choosing an option over an option that is maybe more natural for an agency producer. So to that point, I was always a bit like, no, I want to work externally. I want to kind of have access to the pool of the widest pool, the biggest pool, and the best people in the business who are tied exclusively, generally, or at that point, where I think there's obviously a large shift there as well, or has been over the last 4 or 5 years. So when I then joined Monks, or Media.Monks as they were called back then, I realized I was now at a true production agency. So it didn't quite feel like it was an in-house job, because that's what we were. We were kind of in that hybrid space in between your holdcos and your production companies. Obviously, ultimately, similarly, like tarred with the same brush, because you can't really argue that Monks were an independent production business at that point. They had already been acquired by S4 Capital. But I came in to work on the BMW account, and the BMW account had been, or BMW MINI, but I was on the BMW side of things initially. And that pitch had just been won 8 months prior, and they were figuring out how to work this. And it was a constellation that hadn't existed before within the BMW MINI universe, where they were working exclusively with one partner for both creative and production. So it was an interesting relationship building moment, where you were working with people who didn't necessarily want that change. And that's, I guess, true of any pitch, right? The brand managers, the comms managers didn't necessarily want to change their agency, but you have to make do. And similarly, I guess, across the food chain, right, it's not always the people who make the work that want the change, or rarely. So then
I don't think anyone wants change. I think that I think everyone, like guys, we were talking about, unless it's forced. change is normally forced upon you and then you eventually do it. But otherwise, I think it's a very interesting time we're living in, as we discussed, you know, where we're forced to change rather than thinking about changing. And then it's very interesting, that whole process, the challenges of that.
It's true, and you have to retrain your brain. And I think I've got to a point where I'm in that mindset, in that headspace where, and it's such a cliche, but any change is an opportunity, because and I always say, like, I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and when I used to play with her with building blocks, and I still play with her all the time, but it's not building blocks anymore. We built a big tower, and the tower fell because it wasn't stable enough, and she cried. And I said, look, this is an opportunity for us to build it bigger and higher and better. And that's kind of how I look at it, in a sense of, like, when you get let go somewhere, or when a project falls through. If you've been working on a job and you're about to go on a shoot and the client says, no, sorry, we're not doing this, then it's an opportunity to take the learnings from this and make sure that you've got more decision gates built in next time, and to build a more rigorous process. So that change, and it's something that had to happen. So I evolved because I had to, and it wasn't my decision to adopt this new mindset. And for 10 years of my early career, well, maybe 13, 14 years of my early career, I was in quite comfortable positions where I was like, oh, love this place, love the people, I'm going to be here forever. But then you kind of, like, you want to progress, and as soon as you rise through the ranks, you realize you're dealing with bigger problems now. It's not actually, you don't have fewer problems, or you don't have more autonomy, or you just have more responsibility and more pressure and bigger stakeholders to deal with. So it was kind of like, I think one of the main reasons for rising up through the ranks is you don't want to be managed by that person anymore. You want to be above them, or you want to be a peer. And then you realize, oh, there's another villain above this. Oh no, I'm dealing with this person, and they might be even more imposing, or more terrifying, or more inspiring, depending on who you're working with, right? But that was. So when I joined Monks, I had, to your point, a team of producers who were in Munich, Stuttgart, Berlin, London, Madrid, Barcelona, and Amsterdam. So, and that was necessitated, by the nature of Monks being mainly Amsterdam and London in that era, and the client wanting an agency in Germany. And so an agency was built in Germany, and the production hub was built in Berlin, and the production hub was built near Munich, near Stuttgart. So all of a sudden you have this kind of multinational, multi-regional setup, which was super interesting, but also massively frustrating, because you can't manage the people in the right way, because you're not with them at all times. But then, so initially I was kind of tasked with building more the whole operation, because there was no account management, which was interesting. So us producers were doing account management and production, and then we managed to kind of as a team collectively build that layer in. And my progression internally was then to switch over to head up both production side and agency production, where again I found myself wearing too many hats for my head and figuring out, like, who am I actually doing this job for. I was on a shoot as the person responsible for post-production, as the head of production, but also as the agency producer and the client liaison. So I was like, I can't do all of these jobs right. I have to shoot myself in one of these feet. I have 2 feet. So I kind of limped to the finish line, and we got it across, and we learned from that, and we built, and we made better decisions around which jobs to keep in-house, because obviously there was a big uproar and a big outcry, as you know, in the industry at that point, particularly in Germany, because we were we were seen to infringe in the production market, right? So we were taking a lot of money, a lot of budget, a lot of big jobs away from the production companies, and doing them in-house, and often not doing them properly because we were a small setup and we weren't built like a production company with all the agility and flexibility that being a smaller shop gives you. But you have kind of all the administrative pipeline and effort of a behemoth of an agency, where you know that even getting your dinner receipts, your client expense report approved and paid takes 6 weeks. So imagine what that does with paying a ton of freelancers. So that was interesting, figuring that out, and also doing making sure that, like, finding a blueprint and building a decision tree for which work to funnel into which pocket, like this, like super big creative effort needs to go external, needs to go to the best directors. But if you have like a smaller budget product piece where it's purely car porn, then yeah, keep it in-house, because that's where your margin's going to be best, the risk is going to be lowest, and the requirements in terms of creative are much smaller. You need kind of a technical DOP, you need someone to figure out the right angles, and that's going to be your creative director, your art director. So you don't need a big name director or external production company to do a car porn shoot or a small social agile shoot with a car on a road in Barcelona. So it's just about picking your battles, really, and I think that's what not everyone's doing right. I think and that's probably a topic for after this, but while we wrap up Monks. But I really learned, and I keep saying this to everyone, I at Monks I learned to work entrepreneurially and manage the P&L, make sure that the money going out is smaller than smaller than the money coming in, and making sure that I've got my team covered, my people covered at the end of every quarter, which is equally terrifying and liberating at the same time, because you know exactly what's coming, and you know what's around the corner, and you can see into the end of the year. You know who you can bank on, and where you should and how to hire. And so strategic hiring becomes a thing, and strategic team building, and not hiring for the sake of it, and rather to hire a junior in Barcelona and a midweight in Berlin than an EP in London. So it's a bit of chess, but it's fun to work like that and not hire people for the wrong reasons and not do right by them or by yourself or by the business. So that was and that was fun while it lasted. And then BMW decided to pitch. So that marriage came to a natural end, and I was about to move into a different role within Monks, and then a few people came along and offered me other things, and I chose one of them.
Fair enough, and it's a very, very interesting insight. You touched on lots of points that's there that people don't consider, or I wouldn't have considered anyway. It's very interesting. And just on this in-house conversation, I mean, the conversation's been going on. It's, as you know, it's been going on since then. It's still going on, raging on. I keep going to events, and the APA is vitriolic against the, as they rightly should, because they represent production companies, of course. But it feels like, this is an inevitable, and in-house is going to continue and continue. But as you were actually running, what does it genuinely do well, and where does it fall short? Because I think, there's a lot of noise around it and not enough honest conversation. I mean, just from what you were saying, that was really interesting. And what it does, what it does well. Also, this entrepreneurial element that you have to take on, or someone at least has to take on, which is a very different mindset, and delivering on quarters, and just being part of a larger corporation.
Yeah.
So you have to do that whole corporate speak, as it were, and systems, of course, which are very different to very small production companies. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What would you say?
So I think, and fully echo your points. And I've been watching this this fight from the sidelines for a while, and I'm massively frustrated by how it appears that the two sides of the industry can't come together in a more productive, constructive way. It almost feels it's come a bit to a standoff between, as you say, IPA and APA, and in other markets, with the AICP in the US, it's a similar story, and in France, it's even more so, because agencies dominate the market now, and I think it's something like 70% of the jobs that are now produced in-house. I mean, I don't know, that was a figure at some point that was bandied about, and Steve Davis is a friend of mine. So I always find myself, like when we're going to catch up in a couple of days' time, actually, and I always go into these meetings almost like in a little bit of a, with a, I don't know, I always feel bad, like, because I'm part of this, I wouldn't call it like, I'm part of this frenemy, because ultimately the two sides can't do without each other. But I think they're having a hard time to figure each other out and to understand. But and that's also because I don't think the spokespeople of both sides are always necessarily 100% genuine about their intentions, and that's probably not even because they want to withhold information, but I think it's hard to see what motivations are, and especially as an extended arm of a production company or a holdco, there's only so much you can say about what's going on internally. But I think, and there are a lot of myths as well, where production companies would accuse, or the APA would accuse IPA agencies of almost, how do I put this diplomatically, well, incentivizing their producers to go in-house, and that's not necessarily something I've experienced in that way, and I wouldn't call it incentivizing. It's almost more a case of agency producers feeling the pressure, the margin pressure, the budget pressure, and the risk that's inherent in the job. Ultimately, I think it's more that a lot of people are thinking about their own job. It's almost a case of, oh, if I give this to an external production company, my job might be on the line. So there's that pressure and the threat that's hanging over you. So I think a lot of agency producers may not be able to take those decisions anymore. But I also think there's a bit of a shift in that, in the sense that there are creative agencies within holdcos that are stronger, have a stronger lobby and a stronger sway over where the job goes, and in other agencies where they've managed to consolidate teams into their production unit, it may be a bit more harmonious, or maybe a bit more two-sided. But I've always said, and I was at and you may have been there as well, 2 years ago in Cannes at LBB Beach, there was a panel on in-house production, and you had 5 people from in-house, from holdcos and independent in-house production companies on stage, who were being interviewed by Matt Cooper. And it was frustrating for me to see that nobody really made a point, and there was no unified front as such, and there was also there were no olive branches in attendance, and it was very much a standoff, and the questions being asked were very loaded, and the answers were devoid of proper explanations. And I just thought, guys, you could just get together and just thrash it out and say it like it is. And ultimately, for me, at Monks, the biggest bonus, the biggest benefit for me personally, and for the business of keeping a job in-house was that we could be in there and look at things through the production lens from day one. And day one isn't, as many creative agencies would say, the day that the script is approved by the client. The day one is the day that the client briefs the agency. At that point, you need production at the table, and that doesn't happen. And I mean, I invite any head of production to prove me wrong or tell me otherwise, but it doesn't happen consistently, continuously, regularly, and with that kind of rigor and as an instrument. I don't think production is used as a strategic lever enough, so it becomes a downstream function and becomes very transactional. So a lot of people along this long line of people who've been working on the brief for 8 months before it even touches production will treat production as such. And then you've got an agency producer who under pressure has to make a decision of where to give this job, who to give this job to, and they will often then go to their mate who sits next to them, who is in the in-house, and go, can you dig me out of this hole? And all of a sudden that job has stayed internally, because if I bring someone in from an internal production capability and I string them along for 2 months and then give it to an external production company, you've got that same kind of that same conundrum, and your moral compass is equally confused and pointing in the wrong direction. So, but for me, the biggest benefit was client is in the room briefing the agency, and I am part as that room. I'm in that room, and I can work with the creatives throughout the process, and basically help the process along and shape the idea in a sense, and through the long lens of actual production and beyond. So feeding in what the needs are beyond the initial toolkit deliverables, right? So speak to the creatives about what they need to consider at that stage. So if I don't have that involvement, if I don't bring in-house production in at that point, I think further down the line, things may get diluted. And so for me, that was the biggest benefit. And that's all someone needed to say on stage at that point, and I would have been happy. Now, I think what worked for me was that decision tree that I mentioned, where I had a very clear delineation of what type of job deserves which type of execution. And this was at Monks, where we used this and applied that rule, and it worked really well. But it took us 2 years to get to that point, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of unfucking things. And I think that's generally what I say about that period of my career, is where I learned how to unfuck things, and I know how to do things better now, and I think I've got a good blueprint of how to do it right and how to do it properly. And I think there is a place for both sides, and obviously you have, yes or no, it depends on your client. If you've got a scale client, then in-house production is probably often your best bet. But I don't think outstanding creative excellence and production scale are necessarily enemies or mutually exclusive, but there's still a time and place for outstanding creative collaborators, as much as there is for the machine at the end of it, and hubs automating briefs. So it's about finding that balance and working together. And I think that's what I miss a little bit, speaking to both IPA and APA, and I'm just like, I'm on the fence, and I always lean more towards the people who make the work, because as I said at the top of the call, or as you rightly asked me, has that kind of my origin story made me see directors in a different light, and it has.
Interesting. Yeah, these are all great because so many people are, and rightly so, you know, it affects everything. The way the market has changed, the way the suppliers have changed, the way we have in-house, and this. I thought that was really interesting what you were saying. Okay, so then let's talk about something else now. Let's talk about something else, but similar. Well, the same, of course. And then, you know, just recently, well, relatively recently, you went Publicis.
Yes.
Which is a completely different scale again. You came in as global production architect on their biggest new business win of 2025. I mean, that's a pretty big brief. I mean, I've never heard the word architect either yet, you know. What does a production architect actually do day to day?
Well, just to like start at the beginning of my Publicis journey, I was brought in as the global head of production on Heineken. So I worked on Heineken for a little while, and then the Mars pitch came along, and I wrote a piece on production strategy. And my line manager liked it and put it in the deck, and it was basically ultimately described the role of the production architect. And she said, "You wrote the role, now you have to play it," or asked me to play it, and I said sure, because I never say no to a challenge, sometimes to my own detriment. Or as I say, I run but never away. And so I ran towards this and grabbed it, and we transitioned the account, and I played the role of the production architect. And the production architect, the way that we envisaged it, or them, or me in that sense more specifically, was to sit at the intersection, at the crossroads between data, media, creative, and production, working closely with the client. So, and for me, that was, as someone who's always like the metaphorical salmon trying to try to swim upstream and be at the source and give that production input and add my production thoughts and brains to that inception moment. I thought, okay, cool. This is another step up. This is another 100 yards further upstream. And so I was excited by that, where I was in meetings with the heads of the media strategy and from the data team and measurement, and talking about execution of PR and social and influencer, and like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 executions. So that was really exciting. And I was invited to play outside of my comfort zone, which again was another one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, I want to change. This is exciting, you know, hindsight. But also I think that role works best when everyone, all of those components work together. And I think it's hard for something like that to be forced together at the speed of light. So I'm sure that, like, given the time, this role will, both at said place and other places, will come into its own. But it was a silent revolution that I hope we kicked off there to bring production truly upstream and make it that strategic lever. So that was the role, working with the creative agencies, media, bringing in the data, and making sure that from a reuse perspective and adaptation perspective, everything that we need downstream is considered upstream. And I think that's often where the disconnect happens, right? Someone produces the master toolkit, and it's handed to whoever deals with localization, adaptation, transcreation, and that automation piece. And it's unpacked, and you realize the flat pack is missing a couple of screws, or has got the wrong hinges. And if you've got that person sitting at the top of that manufacturing food chain, they can make sure that the right nuts and bolts are in the pack. So when the pack is built, it suits everyone, or most people anyway. So that was the role in a nutshell.
Good. And you were operating across media, data, and production. So across 13 global regions. That's a long way from a production company, a director, and a shoot.
Yeah.
Is production even the right word for what that job is?
That's a good question. And before I started at Publicis, I maybe naively or arrogantly didn't consider that production in that sense, because for me production kind of ended at that point where you've created your master toolkit of hundreds of assets. Where on BMW we sometimes had 1,200 assets created per campaign, right? And then it was given to the adaptation team, and months later you get feedback that maybe only 7 out of 23 countries have actually used your toolkit because it didn't work for them. And then moving into Publicis, I realized that there is a fix for that. And the fix is, again, like much earlier involvement. So it is production, absolutely, but it isn't prime production. It isn't like, it's not tier 1 or tier 2. It's like kind of, it's more technical production. More strategic production, I guess, in a sense, but often it's due to the fact that the consideration isn't brought in early enough. It's very reactive production, because like you want to ideally give all markets the best use of the master toolkit, but if say a market in Asia unpacks the toolkit and they find nothing that's relevant to them, our cultural nuance and the local relevance hasn't been considered at the point of producing the hero campaign. And I can say this across all brands, all clients, all agencies I've worked at. This isn't necessarily only true of 1 or 2 employers. It is an issue, and it is something that so much, just like after a shoot in the edit suite, there'll be people crying over the scenes that end up on the cutting room floor. On a bigger picture, on a more global picture, from a brand perspective, there are brand managers, comms managers crying in regions about the assets that end up at the bottom of a drive of the cloud and never get seen again by the people it was made for. So it's that kind of bringing cultural relevance and regional nuance to the master execution, and again, like making sure that everything is catered for, whether that be through shoot bundling, master shoots, or just from an ideation perspective, making sure that it works globally. Be that an animation campaign where it's kind of something like Chipotle or other big brands have done across the years, where it's easy to make that work across all regions via adaptation. And so it's either, if it's not a creative consideration, then it needs to be at least a production consideration. And we found that it was interesting when you get that data back to see where your asset was used and how many times and how effective it was. And I found that most blatantly at BMW, where we thought we'd created something amazing that would work everywhere, but clearly there is no catch-all, and there is no one-size-fits-all. So you need to make sure that people get their own bespoke assets that you can best capture within a big global master shoot, because then the region gets the best bang for their buck, and manages to sell and retain their jobs equally. So there's a time and place, I think, and that's a consideration maybe, that if you're a production company and you're wondering why the script hasn't come to you, it's not necessarily, this wouldn't be your first thought. but there is a lot more to it, and there's a lot to unpack. And there's I think there's a way we can all work together brilliantly in harmony and make creatively outstanding stuff that is still effective and efficient when it comes out of the machine the other end.
Okay, great. And where's it all going? So this is the last. I've only got. Don't worry, I've got. I'm conscious of our time here as well. Which is everything's been going great. I have to say, it's been really, really interesting. So I'm just going to go through. This is the last bit. Then we've got a quick fire, and then we're out.
Yeah.
But where is it all going? I mean, from your perspective, you've actually implemented this stuff. So Gen AI, so generative AI, real-time rendering at Toyota, automation at Publicis. Most people talking about AI in production have never actually shipped anything. You have. So what broke, what worked, and what would you do differently?
I think where is it all going? First of all, I think, and I've been asked this many times over the last year or so, and
everyone's asking themselves it every day.
Yeah,
they're waking up in the morning going, "Where's it all going?"
100%. Where am I going?
A new iteration. Yes, exactly. With a new normally it's where am I going, and now you've got to go. Well, wait, say what's going to happen with the technology, because it's moving at such an astounding rate.
100%. And the funny thing is, it'll be a different answer in 3 months' time, right? Yeah,
that's the best way to say it. Because I was going to say, as I was reading it, I was thinking, well, that was then, and this is now.
Yeah, I mean, someone said to me recently, when analyzing what I've been doing, and I said, "Oh, you're from quite a traditional background," and I said, "Well, no one's from an AI background today. Like, we kind of like, you need to understand the origin to be able to analyze the evolution and see where it's going, right? You need to know the problem to figure out the solution." So I thought that was quite a humorous question. I'm like, yeah.
But I think it's also very positive to push back on that discussion, whether you're an AI person. I think you need to, if you want to be in the conversation, it's important, or it will help you if you understand what it is.
Yeah.
And then you can have a conversation, in the sense that if you're a filmmaker, having an AI solution or using an AI tool, complements you as a filmmaker, potentially, rather than I'm an AI person, whatever that means in that context. I'd imagine I'm going to make a film, and there's a couple of do you see what I'm trying to get at here? There's a lot of
absolutely.
There's a lot of nonsense there. There's a lot of people going, I'm an AI filmmaker. Are you? I mean, I keep seeing a lot of the stuff. Don't get me wrong. I see some excellent stuff, but only at the moment, from my perspective, very little stuff in the bigger mainstream. That's not to say that, there's a lot of discussion for all those famous directors that we all love. They're going to come, definitely. They will come. They are coming. But at the moment, it's interesting. Anyway, over to you.
I think it's, and obviously this started like 4 or 5 years ago. We started talking about this, right? About AI and Gen AI, and Mark Whelan, who's the chief creative officer at Havas, and at the time he gave an interview and he called AI his robot collaborator, and I think that's still very true. And he said an autonomous car is only as good as long as there is a passenger, and the passenger knows the destination, and the destination gives the passenger a benefit. And that's something that I still like to quote. Thank you, Mark. And it's still so true of today. I think there's, again, like, lots of directors have evolved in that space, right? And there are like amazing directors who come from a filmic background, like Paul Trillo, and who've made fantastic generative AI created music videos and ads. And a lot of creatives I've worked with have now, in the meantime, won AI awards or Gen AI filmmaking awards, because ultimately it's still filmmaking. You're using different tools, right? And that it's not the first time that we in the entertainment industry or in the advertising TV industry have been through this. I mean, it started with digital filmmaking. All of a sudden, there was an outcry that now everyone could make films and everyone could make ads, and ad agencies would all become redundant. And then YouTube came along in 2005, and everyone was like, "Oh, advertising's gonna die," and we adapt and we make it our own. Or when the music industry, when Napster was about to kill the music industry, and then streaming came along, right? They found a way to monetize the threat.
Well, the only thing I would add there is that it feels like Spotify has killed the music industry largely.
Yeah, I don't use
with the
Spotify.
amount of
Spotify's my enemy.
Streaming there is not necessarily. I'm always like, sorry, how much did you get paid for how many streams? You know, it's always a bit like, okay, I get that. Fine.
No, yes. I also still think in gold discs and platinum discs, and not in 50 million streams. But
on a positive level, with you know, just to counter that thing I did say just about Spotify with ruining all of that, is the fact that it does give you an amazing. It gives people access now. People have an opportunity now that they've never had before, or it's taken away a lot of the gatekeeping. You mentioned platinum records, things like that. There were gatekeepers in these industries. There still are. Yeah. But the positive thing about the technology at the moment is, you know, as I'm doing this podcast, I can upload my podcast to Spotify, and suddenly I'm able to communicate that. Whereas previously you didn't have those things, and I think there's a lot of wonderfulness around it, and we need to be mindful of that. You've just got to grab it and go with it, rather than sit from the side and go, "Oh, I haven't got." I can't do that.
It takes you back to that like chicken, egg, or opportunity threat question, right? Where I think it's completely democratized the way we work, and I think in terms of where is this going, to your question, I feel like there is an opportunity now for, and obviously it's a shift that's been happening for a couple of years, where production companies should be in a much better place now to work direct to client, and production companies will have to adapt quicker and have to evolve quicker and get the right people to speak that language or be the conduits. And but in that messy middle where you've got the holdcos and the traditional indie agencies, I think it's hard, because I think it's becoming a bit of a race to the bottom, right? I think you just need to make sure that you retain your identity whilst evolving. So mutation can't take over from evolution, and I think that's a danger. And you've seen like companies rise and fall with trying to adapt and trying to outdo the company or the entity or the organization that's been there before. But I've seen an interesting development recently, and I'm sure you will have as well, where you've got these splinter agencies popping up where like 2 or 3 people, in terms of the democratization of this, right? 2 or 3 people have started their own agency and are doing really well. And you start to look at like the bigger operations and go, oh, are you flexible enough? Are you agile enough? I think it might then get to a point where there will be a much clearer delineation between what type of client will choose which type of agency, because I think there were, and it's already happening in terms of pitches, but like years ago, I think creative brands were always quite keen to explore the whole spectrum of agencies. But I feel like it's a lot clearer now for me, looking at brands and agencies where they're probably better placed in terms of like SMEs, but versus global brands. But so I think that's interesting, where it's almost like the fire's dying down and you see green shoots. But maybe that's just my glass half full attitude or outlook. But I think we will learn to use AI as a collaborator, and we already are. I mean, like so much of our daily life is agentically run, and I think that's something that's really interesting. I found that quite exciting morbidly exciting at Publicis, where all the holdcos have it, right? You've got Omni AI, and you've got WPP Open, and you've got Marcel at Publicis, where the agentically led workflow is such a massive a massive facilitator, and it makes everyone's lives much easier, but it needs to be used in the right way and for the right things. And I think that's what's going to happen more over the next couple of years, where it should make working with each other easier. But what we also notice is that the people still need to be there. People still want a front of house. People still want human interaction and engagement. And but the speed of operation is now much greater. And I think from a production point of view, production companies, I feel like is obviously, and it's sad to see the demise of many fantastic production studios and post houses production companies, and there have been a couple obviously over the last couple of weeks. But I think in due course, production companies should be able to take on more work rather than less, because of the expedience by the tools they have, right? So smaller companies, smaller agencies, even though there are maybe fewer briefs or the budgets are smaller, I hope that while the budgets are smaller, there'll be more briefs coming in, because smaller brands can also all of a sudden afford to make brand campaigns, right? Because production of a brand campaign, if it's Gen AI leveraged, is a lot more affordable. So if that makes sense. So
it does make sense. It totally does. And here's the question I keep thinking about that I wanted to ask you. Just something I've been hearing a lot around. There's a version of the future where the holding company model wins everything. So scale, tech, efficiency, they've got it all. And then there's a version where craft, independence, and genuine creative thinking win. You know, more independent agencies, more independence, things like this. Where are you actually betting? What do you think? I think that's a bit mean to say where you're betting. It's putting your, it's too much to say. But what do you think? I mean, from being the other side, do you think the beer moths are going to it's going to take over, or do you think there's much choice?
First of all, again, like I'm an idealist and an old romantic, so I would kind of always in terms of betting, I never bet against my team, so I wouldn't bet against my dream, if that makes sense. And I think. And maybe that's a bit of a vanilla answer, but and I kind of got to it with what I said before. I think there's a time and place for everyone.
Just on that vanilla answer, you're saying that you think in-house production is going to win in terms of
no.
It's not saying you're not saying that.
No. So my vanilla answer is looking slightly on the fence by saying there's a time and a place for all of the above, where I think certain brands will pick holdcos for their execution automation, and other brands will pick the creative champions. But I think in terms of that, I feel like there's going to be a lot more players, where indie and boutique agencies maybe now competing with three human outfits, as in like outfits of 3 humans running their own agency, and then it becomes a danger of people who are starting their own agency becoming too big again. But I think, I think we kind of were, a couple of years ago, we were congregating in that weird, like, Pacific garbage patch where everyone was doing the same thing or trying to vie for the same jobs. Production companies were doing direct to client. Clients were in-housing and producing their own work in-house, and creative agencies were also in-housing. So all of a sudden, everyone was competing for the same jobs.
Just something that's coming to my mind, just to add to this, is in a buyer's market, creativity is going to lose, because before, when some of the best creativity has been around, and let's be clear, it's never not all the creativity. You mentioned like a lot of the jobs, let's say the middle end of the jobs that no one enjoyed actually making, that will probably go, in my mind. But this top tier stuff will remain for obvious reasons. One of the things the thought was gone, but it's anyway. No, I've lost my thread,
because it's these businesses. are still run by humans. Decisions are still made by humans for now, until we reach a state of general intelligence. But and humans will always want optionality, and within that optionality needs to lie a degree of diversity. So I don't think we're going to live in a world where brands will only choose between the three holding companies, because I don't think any of these offer much over and above the next one. I think there's a lot of interreplaceability. I mean, I like having been at one and knowing a lot of people at the other two. Yes, there is a degree of there is a slightly different positioning within the production capabilities, absolutely. But who knows what that's going to be in 5 years' time, because things shift and change quickly.
What I was trying to get at before, and what I lost the thread of, was with a client having the more control, like a buyer's market. I was using the analogy. Surely the classic fight has always been, I want to see more product. Yeah. And the creative companies have always been, well, we want more creative, almost to the point of ridiculousness, where if that's a word, of not having any products at all if they could. We've all been there, and those things. Yeah. So I mean, do you think that the holding company, or not holding company necessarily, but an in-house production house is more is less able, because they're so much more beholden in a way to a client, or there's more control, as it were. So you can't have those conversations. I mean, from your perspective, because you were there. Yeah. I mean, is that real or is that not?
I mean, again, it's that kind of channel-specific thinking, isn't it? And that is where production strategy comes in, and that's kind of what we did on BMW. We worked with a lot of external talent, external production companies. In the end, once that decision tree was implemented, and I managed to find the sweet spot between this is what we're keeping, this is what we're doing ourselves, and this is what we're giving to the best of the best. And when you work with external production companies, you just need to make sure that everything outside of that masterpiece is heavily templated, and that when you're shooting, you know exactly what your template is for this shot. Like, you pick this shot is for asset X, right? You've got your asset list of hundreds of assets, and you go, oh, this is 275B. In your shooting board, we need this in said framing and in this length. And it still fits in the director's cut in its length, but in terms of the framing and the product, we've made sure that it's one of the pre-selected assets that go through the funnel, and that's what that production strategy thing is, or production architecture, where you go on a shoot and you go into a PPM knowing exactly which of the assets and which of your executions are for the more product-centric channels and executions. So it's just planning. It's what we've always done. It's sort of what we've just, I think there is just this aversion towards anything that's, oh my God, the product, right? It's easier and harder with car advertising, because ultimately the hero is the product. Which some brands like Volkswagen.
Well, not always, but mostly, yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yes. So obviously, Volkswagen were traditionally the brand with the storytelling element, and that's kind of why that was kind of one of my favorite brands to work on. But so it made it easier and harder to not be so on the nose, but at the same time also sell the car from the perfect angle. But you need to do that with every brand. You need to turn up after the PPM. You need to know exactly what's being shot when and what it's for. And I think often I've been in situations many times as an agency producer, head of production, working with production companies where there was a clear disconnect, and those directions were ignored because the director pushed through their vision and said, I'm not going to shoot it this way. And I think that's where people would say, well, that's why I'm keeping this in-house, because I don't want this to happen. But to your point of shift in mindset, I think that old school thinking is probably dying out. There are still directors who operate that way, and that's why you get them in to flip it, right? But then you can't say, but you need to shoot this with a 3/4 front, because then It works best for the stories. You just have to let them do it and go with it. You can't have it both. You can't get the best directors and the craziest directors in and then ask them to dance to your tune. It's with them. It's you're giving that away, and it's scary, but it gives you the best results. And I work with someone like a great director who's like on BMW. We did 2 jobs with her. Super creative, very strong-willed and strong-minded, but very collaborative, Steph Soho, and it was a fantastic experience where we had we were on the shoot, and the creative kept saying, "This is never going to make the edit. This is never going to make the edit. This is never going to make the edit. She's not got the hands on the wheel in the right way. It was just not the right angle. And the seat belt, you can't see it." And everyone was like freaking out about it. And then we saw the masterpiece. All of a sudden, also it was 2.5 minutes and not 60 seconds, and everyone was like, "Oh my God," blown away, right? The different music, all of a sudden there was a voiceover, and everyone fell in love with that film. And on the shoot and in the PPM, everyone was tearing their hair out and freaking out, going, "Oh my God, how can we do this? And this is completely wasted. We don't need this." So just let go a bit more. It's kind of like, yeah, it's that kind of, it's difficult between, you need to plan for everything, and then let go when you can, right? So yeah,
I think that's the best. I think that's the great thing, is to let go. It's very, very challenging when there's so much pressure on you, pressure on the industry, pressure on everything at the moment. It has been that for a long time. I keep talking about people I'm working with Green Desert. We're talking about make production fun again, because Pat, it used to be a lot of fun. It used to be a lot more fun, it seems to be. So moving into the final piece now, we're just going to do quick fire. So really, I'm just going to answer your question. Just give me a simple answer if you can. So, and it's the first thing as it comes to mind, no overthinking, and best piece of, sort of all that sort of stuff. So let's go. So best piece of work you've been involved in that didn't get the recognition it deserved.
Lipton Bauble.
First thing that comes to mind. Lipton what?
Lipton Bauble. It was a Lipton Christmas ad that didn't get the internal recognition, wasn't played at the agency "These Are All Our Christmas Ads" meeting, where like the John Lewis's and Waitroses of this world took center stage, but we won 5 D&ADs with it. And Simon Poet and Sweet Shop and Mark Alberston and I, we got it done against all the odds.
Good. Director you'd give anything to work with?
Spike Jonze.
Agency side or production company side, which is harder?
Production company side.
Biggest myth about in-house production?
Producers are incentivized to keep the work in-house.
One thing the industry needs to stop doing right now?
Self-PR.
And finally, best advice you've ever been given?
Ooh. Oh, fuck. There's so much, and I'm trying to do right by the people. So clearly, I've never been given any advice.
Again, it's not a test. We can, it's fine.
Yeah, no.
It's very, very difficult.
I don't know whether it's.
Sometimes you just get like, there's so much to go through, and it's a challenge.
Can you maybe ask that question again?
Once I
figure it out.
We'll do it. We'll come back to it another time. You can send it in and I'll put it in the comments. Okay, listen, Pat, this has been brilliant. Really great to have you on. And I think this timing is perfect. I really do. I think all of this stuff is such a good thing to be talking about. This is Ad Bits with Alex Grossman. Ad Bits is supported by Green Desert, UK-based representation for trusted service production partners across Europe. So that's 2.0 film across Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Italy, and Austria. That's Grandma in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Tickle Film in Spain. Sparrow Films in Prague. New episodes every week on Spotify and YouTube, and see you next time.